We meet today to pay tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh, who has been at the side of Her Majesty the Queen for more than 7 decades, giving his unwavering support both as a husband and as a consort. Described by Her Majesty as my strength and my stay, for most of us, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, has always been there, providing this nation with a reassuring presence. Whether it's with such dignity attending the formal occasions when the Queen attended Parliament for the state opening, or for visiting different places within the UK or an overseas country, his support and loyalty was always clearly displayed. He was the longest-serving consort in history and the oldest partner of a serving monarch. He never let the Queen down. His passing also marks the end of an era as one of the last surviving heroes of the Second World War, serving as an officer in the Royal Navy with distinction and heavily decorated for his bravery and long service. A qualified pilot, he gained his helicopter wings, became Admiral of the Fleet for over 50 years. He helped to design the Royal Yacht Britannia. He visited troops in Iraq and travelled with the Queen throughout the Commonwealth and overseas territories, and only stepped down from official royal duties at the age of 96. Outspoken with a great sense of humour, he wasn't afraid of talking openly about issues that were close to him. He will be remembered for his loyal devotion to service and his leadership of hundreds of causes close to his heart. Perhaps his finest achievement was the Duke of Edinburgh's award, which helped millions of young people around the world to achieve their full potential as team members and future leaders in their chosen field. As a moderniser and public reformer, he was promoted the latest in engineering and design. As a pioneer in World Wildlife Fund, he travelled widely to secure the public interest in the nature and its protection. His sporting interests were wide-ranging. As a sailor, he regularly attended Cowes Week for the regatta. He was a cricket enthusiast and a player. He also took part in horse riding and performed as a top polo player. He was a winner for Britain too at the courage driving, which he took up later in life. In March 2011, the Duke accompanied the Queen to Parliament for the Diamond Jubilee celebrations. I had the pleasure of introducing him to groups of members waiting to greet him. I remember his interest about ties. Members were wearing particularly if it showed a connection with the armed forces. He also had a special ability to put people at ease. As we reflect on the life well lived, we should not forget the wide-ranging achievements of Prince Philip. The ambassador, the serviceman, the scientist, artist, naturalist, committee chairman, traveller, loyal supporter of the United Kingdom, the overseas territories and the Commonwealth. But we should always remember him as a family man, a devoted husband, a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather. He was without doubt the father of the nation. He will surely be missed and impossible to replace. I now call the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that an humble address be presented to Her Majesty, expressing the deepest sympathies of this House on the death of His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and the heartfelt thanks of this House and this nation for his unfailing dedication to this country and the Commonwealth, exemplified in his distinguished service in the Royal Navy in the Second World War, his commitment to young people in setting up the Duke of Edinburgh's award, a scheme which has touched the lives of millions across the globe, his early passionate commitment to the environment and his unstinting support to Your Majesty throughout his life. Mr. Speaker, it is fitting that on Saturday His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh will be conveyed to his final resting place in a Land Rover which Prince Philip designed himself with a long wheelbase and capacious rear cabin, because that vehicle's unique and idiosyncratic silhouette reminds the world that he was above all a practical man who could take something very traditional, whether a machine or indeed a great national institution, and find a way by his own ingenuity to improve it, to adapt it for the 20th and the 21st century. That gift for innovation was apparent from his earliest career in the Navy. When he served in the Second World War, he was mentioned in dispatches for his alertness and appreciation of the situation during the Battle of Cape Matapan. And he played a crucial role in helping to sink 2 enemy cruisers. But it was later, during the invasion of Sicily, that he was especially remembered by his crewmates for what he did to save their own ship. In a moment of high danger, at night, when HMS Wallace was vulnerable to being blown up by enemy planes, he improvised a floating decoy, complete with fires to make it look like a stricken British vessel, so that the Wallace was able to slip away and the enemy took out the decoy. He was there at Tokyo Bay in 1945, barely 200 yards away from the Japanese surrender on the deck of USS Missouri. But he wasn't content just to watch history through his binoculars. It seems that he used the lull to get on with repainting the hull of HMS Whelp. And throughout his life, a life that was of necessity, wrapped from such a young age in symbol and ceremony, one can see that same instinct to look for what was most useful, for most practical, and what would take things forward. He was one of the first people in this country to use a mobile phone. In the 1970s, he was driving an electric taxi on the streets of London, the forerunner of the modern low-carbon fleet, and again, a vehicle of his own specifications. He wasn't content just to be a carriage driver. He played a large part in pioneering and codifying the sport of competitive carriage driving. And if it is true, Mr. Speaker, that carriage driving is not a mass participation sport, not yet, he had other novel ideas that touched the lives of millions, developed their character and confidence, their teamwork and self-reliance. It was amazing and instructive to listen on Friday to the Cabinet's tributes to the Duke and to hear how many of them were proud to say that they or their children had benefited from taking part in his Duke of Edinburgh award schemes. I will leave it to the House to speculate as to who claimed to have got a gold award and who got a bronze. But I believe those ministers spoke for millions around the world, across this country, who felt that the Duke had in some way touched their lives. People whose work he supported in the course of an astonishing 22,219 public engagements. People he encouraged and people, yes, that he amused. It is true that he occasionally drove a coach and horses through the finer points of diplomatic protocol. And he coined a new word, dontopedology, for the experience of putting your foot in your mouth. And it is also true, Mr. Speaker, that amongst his more parliamentary expressions, he commented adversely on the French concept of breakfast. He told a British student in Papua New Guinea that he was lucky not to be eaten, and the people of the Cayman Islands that they were descended from pirates, and that he would like to go to Russia, except that, as he put it, the bastards murdered half my family. But, Mr. Speaker, the world did not hold it against him. On the contrary, they overwhelmingly understood that he was trying to break the ice, to get things moving, to get people laughing, and to forget their nerves. And to this day, there is a community in the Pacific Islands that venerates Prince Philip as a god or a volcano spirit, a conviction that was actually strengthened when a group came to London to have tea with him in person. When he spoke so feelingly about the problems of overpopulation and humanity's relentless incursion on the natural world and the consequent destruction of habitat and species, he contrived to be at once politically incorrect and also ahead of his time. In a quite unparalleled career of advice and encouragement and support, he provided one particular service that I believe we in the House know in our hearts was the very greatest of all. In the constant love he gave to Her Majesty the Queen as her liege man of life and limb, in the words he spoke at the coronation, he sustained her throughout this extraordinary second Elizabethan age, now the longest reign of any monarch in our history. It was typical of him that in wooing Her Majesty, famously not short of a jewel or two, he offered jewellery of his own design. He dispensed with the footmen in powdered wigs. He introduced television cameras, and at family picnics in Balmoral, he would barbecue the sausages on a large metal contraption that all prime ministers must have goggled at for decades, complete with rotisserie and compartments for the sauces, that was, once again, Mr. Speaker, a product of his own invention and creation. Indeed, as an advocate of skills and craft and science and technology, this country has had no royal champion to match him since Prince Albert. And I know that in due course the House and the country will want to consider a suitable memorial to Prince Philip. It is with that same spirit of innovation that as co-gerent of the royal family, he shaped and protected the monarchy through all the vicissitudes of the last 7 decades and helped to modernise and continually to adapt an institution that is above politics, that incarnates our history, and that is indisputably vital to the balance and happiness of our national life. By his tireless, unstinting service to the Queen, the Commonwealth, the armed forces, the environment, to millions of young people and not so young people around the world, and to countless other causes, he gave us, and he gives us all, a model of selflessness and of putting others before ourselves. And though I suspect, Mr. Speaker, that he might be embarrassed or even faintly exasperated to receive these tributes, he made this country a better place. And for that, he will be remembered with gratitude and with fondness for generations to come.
The question is that the humble address be presented to Her Majesty as on the order paper. I now call the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In supporting the humble address, I'd like to echo the remarks made by the Prime Minister, and on behalf of my own party, to come together today in appreciation of a life well lived, a life of service and of duty, a life that shaped modern Britain and provided much needed stability to our national story. My thoughts, first and foremost, are with Her Majesty the Queen and the royal family. Prince Philip was a man of many titles: Duke of Edinburgh, Lord High Admiral, a Royal Commander, Baron of Greenwich. But above all, he was a much-loved father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. To Her Majesty the Queen, he was not only her beloved husband, he was, in her words, her strength and stay for 7 decades.
almost 60 years. During that long period, he took a particularly keen interest in scientific development and was a regular at graduation ceremonies. He only retired in 2010, and I know that the staff and students at the university also valued the role and the time he willingly gave. Mr. Speaker, it has also been noted in recent days that Prince Philip took a keen interest in Scottish architecture. There are very memorable photographs circulating of when the Prince joined the Queen to open the Forth Road Bridge in 1964. They were the first people to cross the link between the Kingdom of Fife and that great city of Edinburgh. And that enduring interest with the Forth crossing was replicated some 50 years later when he made a private visit to see the construction of the Queensferry crossing. Once again, alongside the Queen, they became the first people to cross the new bridge after it officially opened in 2017. Now, I know that political campaigning remains suspended, but I'm sure that members opposite will forgive me for saying that I'm pretty sure that Prince Philip would have appreciated that the bridge was delivered on time and under budget. Mr. Speaker, perhaps people's most lasting memories of the Duke were the informality he often brought to very formal occasions. Throughout the years, I think it's fair to say that he wasn't a man for drizzling honey on his words. That trait equally applied to the advice he gave, and there is one memorable piece of advice he gave on the length of speeches, which I dare say some members might even think applies to myself. When it came to the length of a speech, he advised, "What the backside cannot endure, the brain cannot absorb." With that timeless piece of advice from the Duke of Edinburgh, I shall bring my remarks to a close. In doing so, though, I again convey the condolences of myself, of my party and the people right across Scotland to the Queen and to the entire royal family. By any standard, by any measure, Prince Philip's lived a long, energetic and full life. May he now rest in peace.
Right Honourable Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I join with the Prime Minister and everyone across this House in sending my heartfelt condolences to Her Majesty the Queen on the death of His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, and our thoughts and prayers are with Her Majesty and the whole royal family. There have been many tributes in recent days to Prince Philip, some from those who knew him well, some from those who'd barely met him, some from those who'd never met him, but whose lives he had touched. I had the privilege of meeting him and having a number of conversations with him. He was a truly remarkable man, a man of so many talents. We've heard some of them referred to already today. A distinguished naval officer, an inventor, an innovator, a designer, a painter, a sportsman, and so much else. What always struck me when he spoke, when I was having those conversations with him, was not just the incredible breadth of interests that he had, the wide range of interests he had, but the depth of knowledge that he had in each of those interests. He didn't just dip into a subject. He didn't pick something up because it was fashionable. He was deeply interested, he cared, and he understood the importance of getting to know the issues that he was involved in. He was indeed a man ahead of his time, particularly in the areas of the environment and conservation. But that wasn't a passing whim. He deeply loved the natural world. He understood nature, and he was passionate about wanting future generations to be able to enjoy and benefit from the natural world too. And I remember on my first visit as Prime Minister to Balmoral that Prince Philip drove myself and my husband around the estate and talked to us about the estate. It was as if he knew every single inch of it. He talked about the ancient Caledonian forest, about the birds, many of them protected, about the animals, about the plants on the estate, about the changes he'd seen over the years, and about what was needed in order to ensure that this environment could be protected and could be enjoyed by future generations. He was indeed a man ahead of his time. He showed again his deep knowledge, but he was also an immensely practical person. And he was a man of high standards. That did indeed come through his attention to detail in the cooking of the meat at the Balmoral barbecues. But I also remember an event which was hosted by the then Mayor of the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. It was a black tie event Prince Philip was coming down from Windsor Castle for probably no more than half an hour. Now, some people would have said, well, you'll have to take me as you find me. I'll just turn up and I'm there and that's it. But he didn't. He dressed immaculately in black tie. He took the time and trouble because he had high standards, but also because he respected the event and the people who were there, and he wanted them to be at their ease. Now, I've mentioned Balmoral, and I remember my last stay at Balmoral. My husband and I, as everybody knows, enjoy walking, and we were able to do some walks there, and Prince Philip very kindly suggested a particular walk to us. So we were very grateful for this suggestion, and we set off. When we got back to the castle several hours later, we were told that Prince Philip did indeed enjoy this walk, but he normally drove round it in a car. I'm not sure if it was a test, and if it was, if we passed it, but I also remember on my last visit, when I went to say my farewell, and initially we couldn't find Prince Philip, and eventually I caught up with him. He was